Welcome to the dungeon with Harlan and Andrew.
All right, here we are. We're live. It's happening. Fun fact, Case, our Monday producer, texted me to say, hey, just so you know, everyone can hear you talking right now. So I was like, great,
Hell
awesome,
yeah.
super fun, hot mics, a good old dungeon tradition for us now at this point. Thanks everyone for joining us at this special time. And I'm Harlan Kelly.
I'm Andrew Overdahl.
And this is the dungeon where we talk about the art of mastering game mastering. I said it better that time. I'm getting better at this. That's fun.
The art of mastering game mastering. Yeah.
Just so everyone knows, I did not ask Andrew if we could make that the slogan. I just started doing it. So
I like it. I'm down.
And every week we have a guest on with us. And this week we have Dan Sheehan. Dan, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. No problem. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Dan's I don't know. You're not a new DM, right? Because you've been DMing for a while, but you newly started DMing a Theros campaign, right?
Yeah, I would say I'm newer than most. I've only been DMing for about a year and some change now. And the Theros campaign I've been doing is definitely the first. It's the first source book I've done within Magic. Usually I do like my own worlds, so it was my first time kind of working with a lot of official material.
I see. Okay, cool. Yeah,
nice.
It's a lot. So the question we ask the question we ask first to every guest that we have on here is, how did you get started into tabletop role-playing games?
I played in college. I had a friend who was a theater major. And he had a friend who was, he was studying to teach theater, I believe. He was like a handful of years older than us. And he was just one of the best DMs I've ever met in my life. The guy was just, he was a pro. His name's Chris. He's super, super talented DM. And he just put together this campaign for me and 4 friends that was just so good that the 4 of us have all kind of been chasing that dragon and quite literally ever since. And so a lot of us then, that was when I lived in Missouri for college. And after we graduated, I moved to Chicago, and I moved there with a handful of the guys who were from that campaign. And so a few of my roommates would DM at that point. I was always kind of intimidated by it because I was like scared of the numbers aspect, and we were playing mostly Pathfinder back then. So it was like a little more numerically challenging than 5e. And then when 5e came out and I started playing it more, I was like, oh, I feel like I could run this. Like, I feel like the number crunching has been minimized enough where I could run this with my particular brain, which is not great at like juggling numbers around in the moment. And so about a year and some change ago, I started DMing a game with a handful of those same guys and some other friends. And that's been going for about a year. And then I have done some one-shot campaigns, and then just did this 4-part session for my podcast with Rachel Weeks.
That's awesome. Yeah, the DM.
Nice, yeah, we saw some of that art. It's good.
Yeah.
I am super excited for that to be out there. The first episode hits in a week, so it's super close.
Nice. Will that be a podcast or like a video?
So it's all audio. It'll be edited into audio episodes and released for our patrons first. So it's going to be a patron exclusive for a handful of weeks or months. We haven't quite decided yet, and then eventually we will probably release it to the general public. But we wanted to kind of give it as a thank you to our patrons to start off with.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, Rachel was super excited about her character and just talking about the game. And I think I know a couple of things about the game. Is it spoilers if I talk about them? And can we talk about the god, or do you want to hold off?
Oh, feel free to talk about anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rachel, don't listen if you're in the chat.
But yeah, so Rachel told me about I don't know if it was homebrewed, if you're just approaching it in a specific way, the god that all of the players are kind of interacting with and working with. And I would love for you to tell everybody about it, because it's very fun.
Sure.
Yeah.
So basically the way, for those who don't know anything about like Magic or Theros, the campaign setting takes place on an ancient Greece inspired world called Theros, that's ruled by a very familiar pantheon of gods. You have your stand-ins for Zeus, all the gods are there. So there's this like very big, grandiose pantheon, and the whole idea in Theros is that the belief of those who worship the gods shapes the reality of the gods and shapes the reality of the world they live in. So if enough people believe in something, it becomes real, and vice versa. And so the idea is the campaign picks up in this little town where they worship this god whose name is Kolopaki. And Kolopaki is just the vibe of like all things chill. He's the god in control of good vibes, relaxing times, warm breezes. He is like a remarkably laid back god, which, as it turns out, doesn't really generate enough like there's a clear allegory in the game between gods and companies, kind of, where the idea is like, oh, Kolopaki's not messy enough. His personal brand isn't big and bombastic enough for that to catch on with people. Right. And thus his number of worshipers has dwindled, because even though like the wars between these other big box gods cause hundreds of thousands of deaths, they're much more notorious than a guy who mostly just hangs out and chills with his worshipers. So the story picks up with him having vanished overnight, and the adventurers do not know why. Their god is gone, and they are the only ones who remember the god, and they wake up to find that their town worships a completely different god, has no memory of their god. And that's like right where the first episode picks up, so that's not even a major spoiler.
It's like a god heist.
God heist.
Basically.
And they're the only ones in town with chill, right? They're the only ones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They wake up and the town's not very chill anymore. Everyone's like quietly praying instead of, hanging out by the ocean having a beer like they're supposed to. And so it's their whole quest is basically to either find and restore their god, or, at least live in his style so that they can pass his message around. And they're just kind of on this big search. I don't want to give away too much, but they're basically hunting for their lost god.
That's awesome.
Nice. Is Theros related to Magic the Gathering?
Yeah,
another crossover.
It's a setting where several sets of Magic have taken place. It's like the second major book they did after Ravnica, that is like based solely off of a world from like a Magic the Gathering set.
Nice.
That's awesome.
It's pretty fun.
I just started playing Magic this week, and I am bad at it. But this is not that podcast, so.
Yes, that's why we asked you on here, is to teach Andrew how to
teach me how to properly play Magic, because
if you want the good player of Magic, you probably want Rachel on here, because I've got big lofty ideas, but I'm not. She is a lot better at the game, I think, than I am. Yeah. She got me back into it after like years of not playing, and I, for the last like couple of years, have just been really having a blast with it.
She's a power gamer and everything she does, and I mean that in a nice way. I have
totally
respect. Yeah. I feel like power gamer can be a mean thing to say, but no. So tell, what made you? I mean, besides like it being a super fun thing, I think I love about like D&D settings are that like demons and devils are different. I just love that distinction of like these chaotic evil things and these like super lawful, like, demons will buy the land from you and give you what you want and then ruin your life later, and demons will just like, burn the, blight the land completely. And I love that distinction of that like idea about what evil can be or whatever. And this god just seems so like, it feels like an interesting distinction that it's not like a bombastic party god. It's not like a be nice to everybody god. It's a chill, like that finds like a specific avenue. I feel like that's super interesting, and not necessarily like an adventuring party aspect.
Yeah,
so I'm just interested.
Sure.
Yeah,
it's the dream situation for these characters would be the opposite of an adventure. It would just be like they all get to sit down by in their seaside town and smoke weed and drink beer and have a nice Saturday afternoon. And so it is like it's three characters who do a lot of adventuring, but they're trying to do these adventures so that they the people in the town can continue not having to live a super adventurous lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's sort of about like a little town that's been tucked away from like an otherwise like very dangerous and eventful to the point of being almost obnoxious world. The idea of like what's it like for a civilian in those Greek myths who just has to walk around and deal with the fact of like, oh yeah, these two gods who are siblings got into an argument, and so a giant wave came and destroyed the town that my family's lived in for 200 years. Like, yeah. And so the whole town is kind of founded on the idea of not wanting to be a part of that. And so these three characters are sort of pulled into it almost immediately as their god is absent. Then they immediately start meeting emissaries of these other gods who are all moving in on the turf of this town that had a vacancy basically for their worship. And so they're getting kind of bandied about by different gods who are like, do me this favor and I'll tell you something, do me this favor and I'll tell you what actually happened. And like they're all promising like, oh, once you do me this favor, like then you'll know what happened to your god. But it sort of starts to look like kind of an endless line of favors, and at a certain point they have to make some choices about who they want to believe, if they want to believe anyone. That was kind of the central thing I wanted to explore with the campaign, was just having a god that kind of was the opposite of what the Greek god archetype is.
Yeah. The everyman inside of a world where, people are just can control the ocean and call down lightning and stuff is super fun. It's like some real good character hooks too, because it's like that hobbity like I just want to go home thing, but it just has like a really nice feeling to it. I think from what you're describing, I'm just immediately like, yeah, God, same, me too. I just want to chill out and not have to deal with these big world problems. So I think it's a very fun take on adventuring. That's a good hook.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm excited for people to check it out. I really, in a lot of the stuff that I've written, I like kind of creating like weird little utopias and then making characters kind of defend them against, almost impossible odds. And so it's definitely in that same vein.
Nice. Yeah, that sounds great. I'm like so lazy about gods and religions in my campaigns. Like I usually there's like nothing. It's like, oh, if you guys want to bring something, that's cool, but I'm so bad about it. They'll be like, what's the local, is there like a temple in this village? I'm like, sure, which whatever you want it to be. I'm terrible at it. So
well, I will say in my weekly game, I'm very similar. Where in my weekly game, I'll have to be like, wait, who do you worship again? Because the game I DM weekly is in a homebrewed world where gods aren't really a big part of it at all. That setting is more based on like the reality of that world. Like all the different races have one shared creation myth that their respective race, like the original like handful of them, basically came ashore in a boat and like woke up in a boat and just didn't know where they were before that. And the idea is that the gods are these like very far away figures that aren't really known for sure to be fictional or real, and that their work is done through like 5 immortal beings that were placed there at the start of time and basically kind of put in this big game to see who can affect the flow of history the most.
Oh boy.
Nice.
And so it's like, and they're not really imbued with any particular special power other than like immortality and the ability to practice and study magic, but every being in the world has the ability to practice and study magic. So it's really just sort of like a thought experiment of like, if someone put you with the knowledge you have in your head back in 1800, how long do you think it would take you to become president, or like could you? So there are like a handful of individuals that are like sort of godly that my characters like come across, but they've only met one. They're not the centerpiece of the campaign or anything like that. They're just kind of the way the world is framed.
That's cool. It's nice. Such a fun, like, I feel like there's a million ways of like DM advice or whatever to how to create a pantheon, but just like making a story that's interesting to hear, like just you talking about that, I'm like, oh cool, that sounds like a fun novel by itself. Is a way to just having that little spark of this is an interesting tiny story that you can tell quickly that sets up so much. It just sets up like, here's a huge history. It's just these gods farting around.
And I think it lets you kind of have the story it allows the players to still have control over their own backstories and to not have to, because in Theros, every character is very defined by the god they worship. If you're adventuring, something involving gods is happening, and so in this world, it's nice to be able to have characters who aren't necessarily defined by their relationship to like the universe as a whole and its creation and things like that.
Yeah.
Like I have one character who is lightly tapped into that whole story, but the rest of them are just like regular Joe types who, you know, are just kind of adventurers pushed together by circumstance.
It's fun.
Nice. That's cool. Is this Theros game, are you planning like this is an open-ended campaign, or is it like a mini series type thing?
So what we did was we recorded this current campaign over a series of 3 sessions, probably about 6 hours, and then we're editing it down into about 4 hours of our podcast, or 4 episodes rather. They're not. I don't know what the total runtime is going to end up being. You know, just you go in, you trim out the uhs and ums, and you know the rules, digressions, and things like that, and make it more theatrical and make it more, you know, more of like an audio play to listen to. Yeah. And the story leaves on a conclusive enough note where it'll be a very satisfying story for people, but also there's enough meat left on the bone where if we decided we wanted to do more within Theros, we could swap to different characters, or these characters definitely have more that could be done as well. Nice. So it's definitely the sort of thing that we're open to revisiting if people really like it.
Cool. Well, I already like it. I vote for it. As long as
well,
you
that's
don't,
one vote already.
As long as you don't totally steal Rachel from us, that's up to you.
I promise we won't. It's I don't have a. I feel like especially with DMing, it took me so much time to just write this one chunk. Like my weekly game is a lot of like, you know, like, oh, what goof are we sending you on this week? But this was very much like I sat down and wrote out like a story from start to finish.
Yeah.
And like, it's obviously you can't like it in the middle. It's very much what the players are doing. But I had an idea of where they started and then like a handful of different places that the story could end up, because like I've like written things in the choose your own adventure format before. And so like, I'm very used to just mapping out big story trees. And so even with players having a whole lot of choice as to where things go, I always have an idea of how I'm going to react based on their decisions.
Yeah. Oh man, that's interesting. So you didn't have much trouble transitioning from just like a home game where you're just, you know, whatever dungeon, whatever monster you're feeling, into the like, this is a story. It felt pretty easy.
Storytelling was almost easier, I would say, than running the weekly game, because the weekly game is kind of like, okay, like I have to prep puzzles, I have to prep a monster for them to fight. And when you're DMing with the purpose of entertainment, obviously, like, you know, puzzles still show up, combat still happens, but your number one priority is telling an interesting story. And so encounters with monsters that would have been really grindy in game, like I just altered and simplified because I knew people at home were going to listen to it, and people weren't going to want to sit there and, you know,
an hour long fight.
Yeah. As it is, like combat is still, you know, it's tough to make it a quick listen to if you include a whole fight in there. But then, you know, some of the monsters I wanted them to fight were higher level and had these crazy abilities where it was like, okay, and then after you've dealt it 200 damage, then it reveals its second heart, and you have to deal the heart this much damage. And I was like, okay, by this point we have fully lost the audience. So I'm gonna explain what it looks like myself to the audience, and we can worry about all the second heart stuff, you know, kind of behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So I definitely did like a lot of reskinning and like artful poking at different rules and character sheets to make them kind of into what I wanted the story to be, which on some level feels like sacrilege because obviously like so much work goes into making these settings, but also it does make it fun because then even people who are familiar with the setting don't 100% know what's coming.
Yeah. I like swear by that. I give that as DM advice. Like, feel free to take apart any monster and take any stat block and just put a coat of paint on it and make it whatever works for you. Because why? I mean, because you're right. The lore is cool and it's awesome, and there are people who want that and it's fun to do. But like, sometimes it just makes sense to do it. Take that layer action and give it to the kobold. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you have seasoned players at your table, you'll see those eyebrows go up of like, oh, this bandit captain has Misty Step? Okay, well, who is this guy? Yeah. I think it keeps everyone on their toes for sure.
Yeah. Well, because like from my first few campaigns, the moments that like really stick with me are the ones that shocked me. And you should still be able to get shocked playing this game, even if you've been playing it for years.
Yeah.
To like suddenly be like, oh my God, that monster does what? Like that's the type of moment you play D&D for, and as a DM you're trying your hardest to do that to people. And obviously, folks are pretty tough to surprise these days. We're all like consuming so much D&D content at all times that like a lot of the big flourishes have been done in one way or another. So it feels very, there's definitely a victorious feeling you get when you find something that feels like kind of fresh.
Yeah, when you can scare the players a little bit. I know exactly what you mean.
Have you ever homebrewed a monster or creature like whole cloth?
Usually because the numbers are where I start to lose a little bit of my confidence as a DM. Like if you like when it comes to like background and storytelling, I feel very confident about writing any of that. When it comes to like balanced stat blocks and like bankable, making sure that it has enough actions per turn to be strong but not too strong, and making sure that it's not going to kill all my players or get killed before it can do the cool thing that I want it to do. So I've never just from scratch sat down and made an entire monster. What I usually will do is find something that is somewhat similar and borrow the stat block and then go through and write the like different attacks, reskinning like other moves or things like that, and basically just trying to make sure that the actions it's taking in terms of like what they do align with like what's happening in the story, but then also have enough basis in the actual game to not be like game breaking. Right. I basically I don't trust myself to not accidentally break the game, so I try to stay somewhat tethered to reality.
I see. So you said like you feel like your strength is more like on the storytelling and like world building side of things. Do you find it difficult at all to be DMing in a world like a pre-established world that has like a lot of lore, and especially lore associated with like the other game you play? Like that do you find that like makes it easier to DM, or is it more intimidating? Because I do that with Spelljammer, and there's at times where I'm like, God, I wish I could just make this shit up in this spot or that spot. But a lot of the times it's nice to have this roadmap too.
Yeah, I like having enough established lore where there's like a backbone to the story. Because if I had to sit down and build out that whole pantheon myself and build out, the entire way that Theros works on my own, it would have taken years before we would have sat down to actually play the thing. Like as it is, the world that I homebrewed, it still has enough holes in it where it's perfect for an open-ended game, because a lot of times the players will get to a town and will be actively communally creating that town as we play.
Yeah.
Whereas with this, when you know that people are going to listen to it, you want to know that they're walking into established situations and established settings. So I kind of liked having the lore as a backbone, but also it was the most in my head I've ever gotten while DMing, because I could almost hear like the real diehard lore people amongst our fans just being like, wait, that character doesn't do that or doesn't act like it. So it's like I go out of my way to make it clear that this is like Theros as envisioned by our podcast.
Yeah.
Which when you have a comedy podcast is easy, because like people will cut comedy a lot more slack, where they'll be like, okay, they're trying to make me laugh, as opposed to I think if we were doing it as more of a straight up no jokes, like very normal D&D, like where obviously humor would happen naturally but isn't like the overall goal, I think people would be maybe a little harsher on my characterization of certain gods and things like, because like I basically paint these gods as like a bunch of petulant siblings arguing with each other.
That's
and
awesome.
like the characterizations aren't fully off brand, because that's arguably what the Greek gods are, is like they're a bunch of incredibly powerful people whose drama is controlling the fabric of reality. But it definitely, there's a few characters who are a little bit nicer in Magic lore and are kind of mean in my game, and vice versa. There are some mean people who turn out to be sweeties. So it's,
That's good. That's fun. I want to play in your game now. That sounds fun.
It's a lot to balance.
Yeah.
I'm hoping I really want to do more with Theros, just because the setting is so big. And like, as a DM, a world where they go out of their way to mention in the source book that, like, because of Theros's whole communal reality, sometimes a place will be a 2-day walk from where you're starting, and then sometimes you'll go back and it'll be a 1-day walk, because like reality is ever shifting, which is great as a DM trying to tell a story, because you're just like, just my least favorite part of DMing is it's a 13-day walk to where you're going. Let's roll out how every day goes, and maybe you fight some bandits, and like that can be fun. Like, obviously, it's on the DM to like spice that up, but like just travel's no one's favorite part of a campaign, I think.
Yeah. The hex crawl enjoyers are small. Those people. It's just Andrew. Andrew's the only one who wants to keep track of rations.
It's especially in like DMing remotely, which I was doing before quarantine, because most of my friends that I play with in my weekly game are in different parts of the country. Space becomes less of a concern.
Yeah.
Like you're just less focused on like, oh, am I, how far off the trail am I? And it's just, because the luxury of the shared game board isn't a thing, which, I mean, I do love all playing in physically the same room and having a board and having miniatures. But when that's not something that's available to you, you kind of just got to go with the whole theater of the mind thing and just be like, yeah, you're close enough to the monster to hit. Like, we'll make it work. Like, because the goal is fun. The goal,
I think it gets
I'm not going to be
cinematic.
like, Yeah, which is like an interesting thing that's happening to D&D right now, because it wasn't always like that. Obviously, it's it started and has been until fairly recently, I'd say, until like the rise of like actual play podcasts and things like that. It's been very focused on like how much is in your backpack, like how many weapons can you carry, like how far are you. Like, it's been a very detail oriented game. So I think that there potentially, as sets like 5e kind of streamline things, but also, I mean, I love how much easier it is to cut to the chase fun wise with the game now.
5e is great because it lets you play any game you want to. If you want to do the hex crawl, you can do the hex crawl, but you don't have to. That's so cool.
Totally. Well, we have a
exactly. Like, the option's always still there.
Yeah.
We have a question roll table. If you could roll a d20, and we will ask you a question from that.
I rolled a 16.
16.
Right.
I don't know if we've ever asked this one.
Fun.
Do you have a favorite homebrewed loot item? Have you ever like invented a piece of loot that you loved?
So this is kind of my signature move as a DM. Is like my very first session, they always encounter a character I call the trinket pervert, who's just a weird guy on the other, because like usually it starts and they're at a tavern or they're at a festival or they're at some sort of group event where the eventual action comes from. And the first night, just to give the players experience playing together and to get everybody on the same page, I have them encounter this character named Corundus Planche, who I've created, who is just a weird trickster god type character who just genuinely gives off a weird, bad vibe. And to date, every party I've thrown him at has always taken the bait and ended up arguing with him, because he's just like a real weirdly like aggressive guy at a bar. Who's just like, just talks like he's like a very, I've played him differently every time. Sometimes I play him as like an impish little like, oh, you have to solve my riddles type guy. Or like sometimes I've played him as like just like, what's this guy's deal? Like, why does he, like, he'll just eat food really weird and grossly, and just generally the type of guy where, you know, if you read like Corundus Planche arrested 40 skeletons pulled out of basement, you'd be like, that absolutely tracks.
Yeah.
We
all went to high school with a Corundus of some sort. You know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so once they end up if they're not violent, to date, everyone who can kill Corundus Planche has killed Corundus Planche. But if they can technically just buy or trade for trinkets from him. And he will always then give a trinket. They basically can like go into this bag, pick out a trinket of their own, and then I have a table of loot that I use. And they're all largely useless objects, but the objects are just useful enough where it can shape the way the character plays for the rest of the campaign.
Oh my gosh. Will you tell us one? Is there one that's like off the top of your head that's like...
Totally. The most useful one that I gave to someone was a single platinum coin that when he snaps, it'll come back to him.
Oh boy.
And so the party has used it to grift just all manner of people. They one time had an innkeeper thinking that he had enough to just finally leave his terrible job and start a new life in the city. And so they It was like I deliberately, once they gave it, because I was like, this is just an innkeeper. Why are they grifting this person? So I decided, I was like, oh, this innkeeper has wanted to leave this inn for a long time, and he finally just got the hope that he needed for decades. Especially with a new party, when you have first timers, you need to like immediately inject stakes so that they don't go murder hobo on everybody.
Yeah.
And so they
it's even worse, like ruining their life. It's almost like sadder, like faking them into a retirement that they can't have.
Yeah,
that's so funny. I have the opposite problem. I was just talking about this the other day with a party where most of the people I play with are like, oh, I feel bad for killing this person now, or like, I don't know, like I feel like I don't know if we should murder the clearly bad guys. And so I did this on the stream the other day, and I find myself just doing it like in most games where I'm like, oh yeah, you find a note in his pocket where he just talks about how he hates dogs or like anything. Because I just have to like push. But you're right, you have to push the party one way or the other. You have to be like, either get them to do it or be like, stop just murdering. Like,
yeah. And so I like the coin was a really funny one. Another one I did that I like is it's just a softly glowing orb that when anyone looks at it, they have to make a Constitution save. I'm not sure if I made it con or if I made it. It was a will save originally, way back when. Whoop, it was a will save.
Deck save.
Yeah, that was a bad dex roll right there. But so basically, if they fail the save, they are compelled to put the orb in their mouth. It's just an orb that really wants to be eaten, basically. And the idea is, once you successfully put it in your mouth, then you no longer have the urge to eat it. So then everyone always spits it out and is like, why did I do that? And I just thought it was like a dumb item. Like the point of these items is mostly just to be like a fun little piece of character customization. But one of my characters rolled it out during a boss fight and just rolled it towards like the big bad, who failed the save and had to take an action to put this orb in his. He like moved towards it and picked it up like a dropped weapon and put it into his mouth.
Good action economy.
I love it.
Good action economy. It's great.
Yeah, so it's,
love it.
Little stuff like that, like a necklace that only glows if the wearer is lonely, but only the wearer knows why it glows.
Ooh, that's a good one.
God, that's so good, because the players will like work so hard to make that useful. They like, I feel like the more useless an item is, the more people love it too. Yeah.
I've also found that giving people fun magic trinkets, like it gets them thinking about interesting ways to use it. And it also stops one of the trickiest parts of being a DM. I don't know if you've experienced this, but the slow accumulation of pets.
Oh yeah, my daughter. Holy shit! Any animal in those woods is going on the adventure for sure.
Always. And so just like it helps people still feel like, oh, I have like a little thing that makes my character unique, instead of like, oh, I saw a cat, I'm gonna take the cat with me. Because then you're 10 sessions later and they're like, where's my cat? And it's like, I don't know, you haven't spoken about it since you took it out of your bag 10 villages ago, so I'm gonna assume it's dead. Gone.
Yeah. I have a 6-person party, and 3 of them have one's a Beastmaster Rogue, one's the Tinkerer that gets like an iron beast, and the other one has find familiar. So it's just a 9-team initiative every single time. Well, the familiar's not an initiative, but it's wild.
That's funny. We have one question in chat. Do you have a favorite monster to use? Do you just have like your go-to, or just one that checks all your boxes?
So I did a brief thing where I sent my characters to a pocket universe for a little while.
Fun.
And in that pocket universe, like most horses didn't exist. Like mammals of that type did not like evolve, and instead, there are horse and small mammal-like versions of people called lil guys. So instead of horses, they basically just had horse-sized men who had little like pouches that they would all ride in, and that was kind of their mount. The idea was that this was like a pocket universe that had been created by like an immortal who had found a way to ascend to semi-godhood. So all of his creations were like very technically life, but also like not very impressive or cool. So it was sort of like a weird, decrepit world full of gross monsters. And so they just had to ride these awful people from place to place.
I love your just trove of weirdo slackers who can just do magical things. Yeah. It's great. Yeah.
It's so good.
Just trying their best, but not quite nailing it is just so funny to me.
Hey. I get it.
And it's, I guess, how DMing feels sometimes. It's like it's you in your head when you start a campaign, and it's obviously never comes to pass. So it's in some ways maybe a unconscious metaphor for the process.
Hey. Be the weird god you want to see in the world, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much for hopping in here with us.
That was great.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was a blast.
I'm so excited to watch this game now.
Yeah, the first episode will hit on December 7th, so we are coming up on it.
Cool. Is there anything else you'd like to plug other than go ahead and we can put the Patreon in the chat if you want. What's the
Yeah, sure. It's patreon.com/commandsphere.
Command Sphere. Cool.
I got it coming. It's coming.
Cool.
And then if you're looking for me on Twitter, my name is just @itsdansheehan. I also run another account called Not a Wolf that's just about a wolf pretending to be a man. And that's @sickofwolves.
Sorry, I meant to have this in my
incredibly
hands.
Cool merch. If you want some merch for your holiday shopping, check out the Sick of Wolves Teespring.
I did not know that was you until this week, and Rachel mentioned it, and I freaked out because I'm a huge fan of that Twitter. And I have had this mask since like the beginning of
that's
like,
so fun
when you put them out, and I didn't even
show
know.
everybody what it says.
It says I don't know. I'm so worried every day. It's very good. It has been my badge of courage that I have taken out every time I go to the grocery store. So check out his wolf Twitter.
Yeah, there's a ton of cool shit on there. So get the people in your life cool gifts that they might not know exist. Check it out. Yeah. Anything else?
No, that's about all I got going on. But thank you again so much for having me.
Yeah, that was great. Harlan and I have a live D&D show. It's called Better Than Heroes. You probably know about it because you're on our channel right now. It's every Monday night at 7 p.m. Pacific. And this Saturday night, we're running a stream of our now monthly horror role-playing game, 10 Candles. It's not our role-playing game, but it's our stream. 10 Candles by Stephen Dewey. And this one, we've decided to set in the Old West. So we're going to be playing that this Saturday night at 5 p.m. Pacific if you want to check out 10 Candles in the Old West.
It's going to be a good time. Everybody dies in the end. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, it's a sad game, but...
Cool. Thanks, everybody, for joining in.
Thanks for watching.
And don't forget...
Tip your DM. Tip your DM, everybody. If you can. If you can't,
yeah, they won't be weird about it. But, if you can, do it. All right. Later, y'all. Bye.